UNESCO Remote Radio Week 2021. Get ready for a week devoted to helping radio stations broadcast remotely.
Good afternoon. It is Remote Radio Week, day 4 of 5, organized by UNESCO in partnership with the World Health Organization. Remote Radio Week is an online training program that is aimed at building the capacity of local radio stations to produce accurate and professional radio content in the event of containment measures or emergencies, including financial difficulties. I'm Andy Leve. I'm pleased to be here talking about something that has become somewhat of a disruptor or a game changer in the computer storing and data space, and that is the cloud. Very elusive thing, but in a nutshell, what it is a combination of software and services that obviously run on the internet instead of locally on your own computer. And I have a distinguished panel joining me in this discussion, and we'll be talking all things related to the cloud, particularly relating it in the context of broadcasting. We've got Jonathan Marks joining us, Rob Hopkins, otherwise known as Rob Radio, as well as Jude Mukundane. Over to you, Jonathan.
Oh, thank you very much. Let me just share my slides. I have a few remarks. Can you see that? I hope you can see that.
There it is, yes.
Okay, great. Well, basically, I wanted to share some general thoughts about the cloud today, because a lot of things are changing. But I would also argue we can learn a lot from, basically, we'll learn a lot from the past. So this is me. About 35 years in international broadcasting. I now call myself a sort of near futurist. I'm imagining, looking at emerging technologies, seeing how that affects storytelling in the next 3 to 5 years. And it's a mixture, obviously, of traditional radio, but also all types of services working on the cloud. So one of the things that motivated me was my work in Africa, where I talked to a lot of local people who said the importance of radio there is preventing isolation. If you want to harm somebody, you can either shoot them, but maybe the second most thing you can do to somebody is put them into solitary confinement and throw away the key. And the problem is, if you do that to a community, then you open them to all types of problems with extremists. So some of the work that I did was in northern Mali, where we saw the impact that radio can have, connecting communities who would otherwise maybe fight each other. And there are plenty of good examples. This is in Lake Chad at the moment, where there's a fantastic radio station that's been set up by a guy called David Smith, together with a lot of locals in the Lake Chad region. And what they are doing is setting up community radio, preserving the local culture and connecting where in an area where most of the rest of the world is forgotten. So in terms of setting up a radio station, I think that there are basically 3 types. There's obviously a news and discussion station where you're connecting communities to prevent misunderstandings. In many parts of the world, that's rarely fully commercially viable. It needs all external funding in order to make it work. Then you have news and discussion to help communities recover after a natural disaster. It could be an earthquake, could be a hurricane. Again, that is rarely fully commercially viable. And then you have, of course, radio stations, which basically are jukeboxes. What they're doing, this is a commercial operation serving an audience to advertisers. And the other thing is, if you at the BBC, there used to be a sign in the window which said audiences are at the heart of everything we do. And unless you start with the audience, they are going to define your success. So, and your audience will actually define the distribution mix that you do. I mean, it's no good running a podcast if your audience doesn't have access to the internet. And that's why it's all about location. If you've got a rural Chad, you're going to reach them but with a mixture of AM and FM radio, because listeners have zero or very poor access to information over the mobile phones. They don't have data plans. So there are plenty of business models which this particular radio station uses. They loan out Zoom microphones, the recording microphones, to local musicians. They want to play local music. And the deal is, if they can make a recording, they give the recording to the band, but they can also use it on the air. And as a result, what they're doing is building the local cultural heritage. Of course, if you're in downtown Nairobi, where everybody's using mobiles, you're going to need a different mix. And that's why I'm saying that the audiences defines your success. And what you need to do, if you're starting out, is define the production process first. Divide the production process, that's making and aggregating the content, from the distribution side. I mean, in other words, sending a signal via an FM transmitter or through the web. And the other thing too, it depends on the format. If you're working a news format, how does the station reach its listeners, but trace the path from the reporter's microphone to the listener's loudspeaker? And all the contributors to your radio station, are they in the same room? Are you coming from a newsroom? Or do you need to connect them remotely like we're doing now? So all this is extremely important to work out, first of all, because then you need to work out what it was the workflow and simplify it as much as possible. If I was starting a station today, I would use all digital equipment, because it's much cheaper than the old analog legacy stuff. There are plenty of ready-to-go equipment that actually been developed for podcasting, and I personally think that that's the way to go. 2 lessons learned in the work that I've done in both West Africa and South Asia. European NGOs and stations often try to help community stations by donating equipment. And if it's analog equipment, it's disastrous, because it's impossible to fix the stuff when it goes wrong, because most of it's obsolete. And the other aspect too is power. Many of the areas where I'm working in, very unreliable power. Do look at solar panels. They've drastically dropped in price, and make sure your production facilities and the FM transmitter is not dependent on mains electricity. In terms of production tools, Zoom, the web platform, I find actually to be the best low-cost tool for collecting audio, but there are plenty of other alternatives, Microsoft Streams or StreamYard, which is what you're using at the moment. And check whether the software that you're using to connect can also record locally, because if you lose the internet, you can still make recordings if the people are in the same room. And also the Zoom sound recorders, there's no relation, I think are the best value when it comes to flash-based recorders. I still personally believe very much in FM. I mean, that's the only analog part that's left, simply because, DAB+, it's been, nearly 20 years in the making, still isn't there in terms of being able to provide radios that are under $10. And the other thing too is about internet feeds. Obviously replaced PTT permanent lines to feed the remote AM transmitters, but remember, you do need the internet, and it has to be reliable. The other thing too is to have an FM transmitter on site. AM is still around in some parts of the world. It's regarded as the medium of last resort, and it's still useful and relevant in places like Somalia, Chad, and northern Nigeria, but not in most places. And as I said, I don't see a short-term future for DAB+. There are various very cheap and very good podcast platforms. But remember, podcasting is not the same as live. If you're going live, then look at platforms, for example, YouTube, which I think seems to work very well. So, YouTube is both a resource, but it's also a distribution platform. And my last point is actually about disaster recovery. I was involved at a very early stage. We're talking about 2006, 2007, building radio stations in a box, so basically a container. And this was to help places like Banda Aceh in Indonesia recover after the earthquake. And the idea was quite simple: build a complete radio station, including the FM transmitter, in a container, and then ship it. Of course, that's not something that is useful for an initial response. You would start with maybe a radio in a suitcase, and then when the container arrives, it becomes a bit more permanent. Problem now is, of course, that the price of the containers has drastically gone up, maybe 10 times in 2021. So whereas we were able to build a complete radio station for about 35 to 40,000 euro in those days, the container would be more expensive these days. The other thing too, and my final points, work with local professionals. Don't think for them. There are too many cases. Haiti is a good example where well-meaning Western NGOs went in to try and provide local internet connectivity. And they went in with their own equipment and immediately put the local internet providers who were there already, they put them out of business. And that's the wrong way to go. I've seen also some NGOs go in with informational campaigns, wondering why, in this case, it was distributing drinking water. They couldn't understand why the locals were washing with the water and not drinking it. And it was only until they asked a local radio presenter at a station in Banda Aceh why these people not using the water we've given out properly. And he came back immediately. He said, you were here 6 months ago. You did a huge campaign saying, never drink out of a bottle of water where you don't understand the contents. You have distributed German Trinkwasser, and they're doing exactly what you told them to do, because they don't understand the contents. They're assuming it may be poisonous, and so they're just washing it. They're not drinking it. And had they gone to the radio station beforehand and involved them, that this particular problem wouldn't have happened. So, and the final point is, why is in the case of a disaster, ask yourself, why is the station off the air? It may be a lack of power. It may also be a lack of money because they've lost either their personnel or their advertising revenue, or connectivity or personnel. And be very specific, understand what do they really need. And it's probably going to be a mix of funding as well as helping hands. Many NGOs go in there with fantastic programming and expect the radio station to be able to transmit this for free. And in many cases, that's absolutely not the case. So those are my remarks. I hope they're useful. And if anybody wants the slides, I'm happy to share.
Thank you very much, Jonathan Marks, taking us through radio through the ages, it felt like, from AM to FM to digital, and some salient points there with the case studies that you had. So thank you very much for that. But moving from AM to FM digital and this elusive topic that we've got for you around the cloud, Radio Rob from OpenBroadcaster in Canada. I think you're a tech head, I'm told. In fact, I did have a conversation with you last week. So I know that you have been creating cloud-related software that you've been using in certain parts of Canada, and I'd love for you to tell us that. But to begin with, let's just hone in on the topic again, which is why radio broadcasters should be using the cloud. And my question to you, Rob, is what are the installation and cost implications long term for the use of the cloud? Once people commit to it, they understand the value, they see the necessity, but where are the T's and C's?
Right. Cloud's really convenient, easy access, anywhere on the internet. It's a big buzzword, but really it's just internet access. And, I develop software, cloud-based software, run a radio station through a web interface, all open source. And the issue that comes up with maintenance and security, one of the great things about cloud software is that if it's a web service, then you can administer it all through the back end. So the maintenance of this to provide the service is greatly reduced. So you can have one server, you can have 1,000 customers or 1,000 people using it. You only have to upgrade the one service. You don't have to go to everybody's individual workstations and upgrade things. And then there's the cost too. A business case, you don't have to buy anything. You can pay as you go plans, so much a month. And if you don't use it, then your stuff is gone. Cloud is really convenient. Everybody's using Dropbox now and all those types of services. I live way up in northern Canada, above the 60th parallel. I'm just beside Alaska, and I've lived up here for close to 40 years now. And also tonight, the Northern Lights are out. It's 4 a.m. in the morning. So anyhow, we have really bad internet service up here. Very, very expensive, very unreliable. Where I live right now, I'm 120 kilometers from the city of Whitehorse, and so I'm right out in the sticks. And so anyhow, cloud service, you have to have decent internet to be able to run this. So if you're in a place that doesn't have good internet, you're going to have not so great experience with cloud software. Because it's all through the internet, and if the internet goes down, then you're out of business. So there's a couple of things that we've done, up in some of the far north communities too, that are satellite-based internet. Satellite-based is order of magnitude more expensive, 20 times more expensive, and even worse internet. So some of the challenges we have on that is we'll do local caching of content. So you'll have a server, and it'll administer the remote playout boxes, and then the playout boxes will then go and download the content different times of day. It'll buffer the stuff so that it only downloads at once. It doesn't constantly be doing downloads. And then the other thing that happens too, using some of our systems, is that if the internet goes down, there's still intelligence on the local box that it plays content and music and news and stuff. You don't want dead air in business of radio. So cloud stuff is super convenient. There's a couple of big things that people should be really aware of. And number one is backups of your data. And if you're going to be playing in the cloud, do not just put your stuff out in the cloud and hope for the best. I saw a slide that said your stuff on YouTube will be there forever. Yeah, it'll be there forever until it's not. And then what happens? How do you get the stuff back? And so lots of people have had this experience. You put your stuff into a storage locker on the cloud, and then the thing's gone. And if you go and look at the terms of service on all these things, there's always a big disclaimer that says you're responsible for your backups. And so the big thing that you want to be able to do, you have to have 3 different backups. If you don't know how to do 3 independent backups, you should not be putting your stuff out in the cloud, because you're going to do a whole bunch of work, and then the thing's going to disappear. So that's one piece of advice there. And then the other one is reading the terms of service really clearly. Exactly what you're going to be paying for and what the terms of the service are. And I work with a lot of Indigenous groups, First Nation groups, and they have a lot of intellectual property, heritage stories, oral stories, traditional stories, knowledge of the land, and so they have intellectual property, and so they have to be very, very careful where they put that. They don't want to lose that. That's their heritage. So the same thing, when you put stuff out into the cloud, you should really take a look at what actually you're telling or giving permission for that group to use. And a thing that a test that you want to be able to do is, if you're evaluating some cloud services, can you take your data and your content, music, recordings, can you put it into the cloud service? And then at some point in time, can you take it all out of the cloud service, without it being a big hassle? And so that's a really, really good test. I've worked with lots of stations before, and they've built a media library. They put their stuff into the cloud, and then they go to get the stuff back, and they go, "Oh, you mean we can't get the thing back?" Or, "Oh, it's been re-encoded into a different format, and I can't get the original back." Or the other one, what happens if I quit paying? Do I get my stuff back? Or, "Oh, I have to pay forever." And so you have to be careful. There's lots of traps out there. So really, really pay attention on the intellectual property, what you're doing, and where the thing is going to be going to, and always have reliable backups. Not just an icon on your desktop that says the backup worked, but you actually know that your backups are working and you've restored them and stuff. So cloud is really good, but again, you have to have really, really good internet service to be able to use cloud stuff. So I think the cloud is the future. Is the cloud. Ambiguous access everywhere for different things. We just have to have a good understanding about how to use that cloud. And then the last thing I'll just say about clouds is if you can, if the concept is remote access to the cloud, to your service and stuff, think about how you can build your own cloud. If you can build your own cloud and you can contain all of your data inside your cloud, then you can take your cloud, you can host it out in another cloud and stuff, but always maintain control of your data.
Rob, thank you for that. I just wanted to ask you, though, and I think you've alluded to it, but if I decided today that I wanted to start a radio station, right, what would you advise the SKU be in terms of hardware and the cloud? So percentage-wise, would we be looking at focusing predominantly on the cloud and going 65% of all of our information, data, software, etc., is going to live in this virtual space, and then the remainder would be the hardware? Or, is it, the complete opposite? Can these two things live in tandem?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I was talking about doing caching services. So the content is out in the cloud. The playout is on a local box, and I've got this guy in here. So this is a balanced XLR. Audio. Anybody know what this guy is here? This is a Raspberry Pi version 4 in a custom metal case. You can stand on this case, and high quality audio balanced out. And so, this the way that our software system works is the management interface and the intelligence is out in the cloud. You tell it to create the schedules and upload the content to the cloud, and then that server manages this remote playout box. And so it will then download the content, it will cache it, it'll be smart enough, and it'll say, "Hey, I've already got that song. I don't need to download the thing 50 times and use that valuable bandwidth." And then if the internet goes down, then there's still intelligence in the box here that will play different content and stuff. And these Raspberry Pi high-end audio cards are like $150 US. So there's your Playout device, cost next to nothing. If you just want a straight online radio station, like a traditional radio station, then you can do everything 100% on the cloud. You don't have to have anything in your house at all. You can just do it completely online. There's tons of services. $5 a month will get you a streaming service if you're an ethnic broadcaster, faith-based broadcaster. You've got under 100 listeners and stuff. $5 a month, yeah, no problem. You can do all that stuff. And there's services out there as well that do turnkey licensing. So you pay a flat fee monthly and you get their web hosting, the service, the streaming mount points, and the music licensing as well to broadcast that music. So cloud is very, very convenient, and it's a cheap thing to be able to initially buy into. Again, you just have to know some of the things to watch out for, what you're actually getting into.
One more thing, and I think this is important to mention, given that we're talking about the radio industry and being clearly audible is the currency, right? But latency, when it comes to internet-related things, particularly the cloud, that becomes an issue. So what is the solution in that case when latency is a hazard to the output?
Yeah, that's a good question. And latency, if you're using satellite internet services, the satellites, the 26,000 miles out in space, it's a half second to get out there. Speed of light, you can't get around the speed of light. So there's always going to be that delay. And if you're doing streaming stuff, there's going to be things, computer gamers, they can't use a satellite internet thing. It's just too slow. But now the other thing to keep in mind, live radio, how many people listen to a radio station and go, hey, that live radio station, that's not a live radio station. They pre-did that. They did that the night before. They did it a week before a lot of the shows. Radio nowadays is really changing from traditional things. You'll queue up your guests, you'll talk, you'll do the interview, you'll edit the thing out, and then you'll play the thing half an hour later, and people listen to go, hey, that sounded like a live thing. No, it's not all live. So that does take away some of the issues about latency if you're doing live programming. There is ways that you can get around that. Some of the cool stuff, though, that I've heard through this really interesting set of webinars about latency issues is there is different codecs, adaptive codecs, and open source stuff I'll be talking about later. But one of them is called Opus, and free software codec. And Opus, what it does is it will, depending on the bandwidth that you have, it will make the quality of the audio better. And then if the bandwidth starts getting congested or saturated, then it'll make the audio quality a little bit slower. And then if the pipe opens up, then it'll get bigger. So that's a really neat type of tool for doing stuff with spotty bandwidth. And again, where I live in the Yukon, man, I had 20 years of dealing with bad internet here, and not just bad internet. I'm talking, and there's other countries out here, where you have a government or you have entities that do not want free speech and they don't want things to work, and so you're trying to make your radio station work, and people are pulling plugs and filtering and routing traffic and stuff. That is one of the beautiful things that I like about FM radio. I preach about this all the time. You can just turn the thing on and you can listen to it. You don't have to get an account. You don't have to get a password. You don't have to get an ID. You don't got to give up an IP. You can just listen to the thing. And so the information can also be freely distributed, right? Without having things locked down. But that's a different thing. So cloud stuff, everything's a cloud. As soon as you get onto a web browser, you're in the cloud. You're in the cloud. And but understanding about latency and just general networking. If you're a broadcaster, highly recommend learning basic networking 101. Umpteen YouTube videos to learn what's going on in the back end of your computer systems and IT stuff.
Thank you, Robin. I know that you have got a masterclass session coming up a little bit later on, where I'm sure we'll be talking more so about free and open source radio tools, etc. So looking forward to hearing you wax lyrical about that. And of course, something that has been coming up in this discussion is the cost implication of running radio stations, right? It's not a small fry. And we're joined by Jude Mukundane from Uganda. Jude, is it RootIO or RootIO?
It's RootIO.
RootIO, there we go. And quite interestingly, here you talk about low cost, high connectivity, which some people would consider to be an oxymoronic statement. But I'm looking forward to hearing you talk about your tiny FM radio stations that require little investment, maintenance, or contribution from the community, yet at the same time offer more and better modes of interaction than traditional radio stations. So over to you, Mr. RootIO.
Thank you. So when we were thinking about RootIO at the time when we got this idea with Christopher Chiksemi-Hai, I was working in telecom in Uganda, and we were trying to get people online, get them connected. But then we realized that a lot of people didn't have access to the internet, they didn't have smartphones, they didn't know even how to use the feature phones. But then they had a lot of FM radio. And so we thought, okay, how do we merge the future that's digital, resident in the cloud, with FM radio that people are trying, that people are using a lot, and that they're trying to own, but they cannot own because of the licensing, stumbling blocks and things like that. So we came up with RootIO, which is a hybrid idea. We still front an FM transmitter, very low power, 25 watts, covering a tiny village, and you can easily power that from a solar panel and batteries in a community. And then that's connected to a low power media device as well. At first, in the first prototypes, we actually used mobile phones because we thought, you know what, these can play media, we can program them to play media, but they can also take phone calls. So people can call in and get live on air and communicate with the community. So that was the sort of emphasis on intra-community discussion where, you had the large stations and it's always like, politicians and prominent people talking down to the community. We wanted to have that voice that's people within the community talking to each other. So one problem to solve was that community setup. How do you get an FM broadcast running 24/7, playing media to the community? But then the other question to solve was how do you bring in then control and rich media? And so what we did was to take this setup, which had a low power media device playing into a low power FM transmitter, and connect that with the cloud. And so from the cloud, we were able to bring in, all the new technologies. We brought in IP telephony, we brought text to speech, so you could upload media stories and have them, read out to the community. But then when that was connected to the low power FM radio station, then you had the two worlds coming together. On one end, you have innovators in the digital space who know nothing about FM radio, many of whom have never even owned an FM receiver, but then designing things that you could then consume on this end using an FM receiver. And so the RootIO setup is basic. You, like I mentioned, have the media play device. In the beginning, it was a mobile phone. We upgraded that to a Raspberry Pi. So you have a Raspberry Pi that can play media. It can also take phone calls via SIP, which is IP telephony. So it can be called directly from our server, but it can also do streaming. And so what we enabled the communities then to do was to be able to, call into these stations, talk to each other, record adverts that were later on played on the station. You have people calling in and saying, hey, I lost my cow. If you see it, please call me on this number. So having like a self-service IVR menu that they could call into. And that allowed for them to, have increased interaction with each other in the community. But when we deployed these stations later on in contexts like Romania, where they had increased connectivity compared to, say, rural Uganda, then we saw people start to take on some other approaches. So they started to bring in things like streaming. They said, okay, you know what? We can think of our radio station not just as FM, but as, as an audience that has multiple channels on which people can get to us. And so they connected tools that allow them to stream over the internet, but also play simultaneously over FM. And that kind of started to bring about a shift in what FM radio or what radio was, because people thought of their community as people who lived in Swansea, Georgia, which is in the Danube Delta. But when they put this radio online on the internet, then the community started to go past the borders, and they thought, okay, we're having now people calling in from the US, wherever, who identify with this community, even though they're not geographically in this community.
Wow. So you went from very hyper local to international.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that that we always say that and talked about in the design of RootIO was that FM radio is analog technology, and you don't have a lot of innovation in that space. Everyone is innovating in the cloud, in the digital area, and things like that. And so we can't wait that the innovators come to FM radio, because it seems like they're moving further and further away. So we thought, how do we bring FM radio closer to the people who are designing tech, who are dictating what the future is going to look like? And so by being able to have those inlets that allow FM radio to plug into the cloud, then we started to consume all these things that that you get so easily in the cloud that you take for granted. I remember when we set up RootIO, we were trying to set up a server in Uganda that had telephony and that could run these stations. And that was a hassle, because we needed to get a fiber connection from a provider. We needed a physical server. We needed a physical device with SIM cards that people could call. And then we had a lot of paperwork to fill in. And we moved to the cloud, and all of a sudden you had a server, like all the networking was taken care of. You could just choose from one of the VoIP providers that you had in the cloud and just wire them into your server. And people in your community could all of a sudden call into the station and leave content. But then you had people who were experts on radio who could log into the portal and review the messages that were left behind and say, okay, these are okay to play. And so you had this synergy where both technologists can converge and build something. Using many technologies from many areas are building something that you can consume, but also practitioners in media are coming together and helping these communities out that they are very far from, and maybe that they've never visited before.
I mean, we love innovation. We understand that it's part and parcel of all mediums, whatever industry, particularly ours. It's constantly changing and evolving. But one red flag one might say is, okay, great that we're innovating and there's this sort of cross-pollination and things seem to be porous. But what about cybersecurity and ensuring that content, doesn't just disappear or goes into hands that it shouldn't go into? What are your what's your advice in that space about ensuring that your things don't get hacked, for lack of a better term?
I think that you need I would say someone who is cloud aware, who knows what it means to live in the cloud. And the trade-off here is that if you decide that you're going to run your own station and run everything on site, you need basically a resource per station to take care of, like, say, the hardware, the software upgrades, and things like that. But when you move to the cloud, this is a cost that you can share. You could have a platform that's administered by someone, and you all buy into this, in a subscription model. And this expert then takes care of all the risks that you would have, because there's so many things that you can't even start to imagine if you were to take this on your own. There is security concerns, but then you have all of a sudden someone coming up with regulations like GDPR, and that was really large for us, because it, for example, meant that data for stations in Europe could not live in a cloud in the US, and so you need someone who understands all of that. And that resource can be expensive if you think about it per station. But if it is a shared cost, if you go for a platform that's used by multiple stations, then the cost comes really low compared to what you get.
All right. Well, in that vein, then, just around the room, what are some of the cloud-based platforms that you would recommend to radio stations, from grassroots community radio stations right up to commercial stations who have far bigger budgets? Let's start with you, Radio Rob.
Oh boy, to name any brands, there is so many out there. Don't even know where to start, to be honest. There's just so many. Like anything, educated consumer, do your comparison shopping, get a checklist. What are the things that you absolutely have to have, and then go through that. Again, the security part, read through the terms of service. The other thing that we were talking about, cloud service, hooking a cloud up to managing a transmitter, a radio thing. That's totally amazing. In the back corner here, beside that radio, those little playout box, that's actually running my radio station on this side, on that side. Sorry, that's running the whole radio station in the Yukon. I own a commercial radio station here, and it's all being run through a data center out of Ottawa, 5,000 kilometers away. I can access it through a web interface. I can do all kinds of stuff to it. But if I can do that, that means one of you folks could potentially get into it, and somebody could hack into the radio box and start playing malicious material, and could lock you out of your radio station. So it's nice and convenient. But what happens if you get hacked and somebody starts putting bad material on? So the security stuff, you definitely have to have an understanding of how your security works, for sure. And the other
Jude,
thing
anything from you? Sorry, Rob, we are running out of time. I just want to hear if Jude or Jonathan have any tangible platforms that
I was just going to ask Rob whether there is that overview. Is there an independent organization that has done the research, basically built a shopping list?
Exactly.
No, I don't.
Ding, ding, ding. There we go. You can start it. Jude, anything from you?
I know that a lot of people are using Airtime Pro, and that's a good one if you already have all your equipment set up. But then what we built with RootIO, similar to Rob, is it allows you to have even the hardware, cheap hardware, and you can start from there. And then as your budget grows, you move on to more professional.
Can I just ask one very quick question to Jude? You mentioned text-to-speech software. Does that only work in English and French, or does it also work in local languages?
Mostly European languages. We had as far as Romanian and Irish, as far as I can remember. But no African languages supported yet.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
That's another ding, 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 a room full of opportunity. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for everyone as well who has been watching us. Most insightful conversation. And Rob, you've got a masterclass coming up a little bit later on where we'll be talking more to you about free and open source radio tools. But right now, though, we've got 2 videos lined up for you. The first one, radio, a vital element for the dissemination of alerts, followed up by something that we've also been talking about in this discussion, which is cybersecurity and data privacy. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, see you later.